So you're going to chip a groove, and then you're going to put the copper and slide it back and forth. But how, and that's going to cut the granite?
The stones are immense, and some of them were cut from a quarry that's hundreds of miles away.
The granite in the Great Pyramid comes from more than 500 miles to the south, are all made with gigantic granite.
There is a piece of granite in London that should not exist. It fits in the palm of one hand. Pink Aswan granite, a few inches long. Cylindrical, unremarkable to look at, unless you know what you're looking at. Around its surface, there is a groove. A single, continuous groove that spirals down the length of the core. Not a scratch, not a chip, a precise, controlled spiral, the kind a machinist would produce on a metal lathe. A Victorian archaeologist named Petrie found it in 1881 inside the Great Pyramid complex at Giza. He spent 3 months trying to understand it. He measured the spiral's angle, calculated its feed rate, how fast the drill had descended per revolution into solid granite. His number, 0.1 inches per revolution. He then looked up the feed rate of the best diamond-tip drill his era knew, then looked at his own number again. The ancient drill had descended into granite 500 times faster than modern diamond drills. He published that finding, and then, for over 100 years, nobody could adequately explain it. That artifact, Petrie's core number 7, is still sitting in a museum in London, unwatched, undisturbed, and completely unexplained by anyone who has examined it in person. Now, an AI analysis of the Aswan quarry site where most of Egypt's granite originated has added a second layer of evidence to this already unsettling puzzle. Measurements of the tool marks, the spacing, the angles, the geometry of cuts made 3,500 years ago. And the results suggest we have been fundamentally wrong about how the ancient Egyptians worked granite. Not slightly wrong. Not details of the margin wrong. Wrong in a way that raises a question almost no one in mainstream archaeology is comfortable asking aloud. About 800 kilometers south of Cairo, where the Nile narrows between walls of ancient pink granite, the city of Aswan sits on the edge of a quarry that supplied stone for the most ambitious building project in human history.
Stand at the edge of that quarry on a clear morning, and the scale becomes disorienting. The rock face drops away in layers of rose-colored stone. The air smells of hot mineral dust and the faint sulfur of the Nile. The heat lands on you like a physical weight. And there, still attached to the bedrock, still frozen mid-extraction after 3,500 years, lies the largest obelisk ever attempted in the ancient world. It was never finished. Workers found a crack. They stopped. They walked away. And they left behind something historians now call the most informative archaeological site in Egypt, a monument to a process frozen at the moment of failure. Every tool mark still visible, every step of the technique preserved in place. The unfinished obelisk would have weighed 1,200 tons. That number is worth sitting with. The Statue of Liberty, steel frame and all, weighs roughly 225 tons. This was a single block of stone, 5 times heavier, intended to be cut from bedrock, transported hundreds of miles, and raised upright at a temple complex. The mainstream archaeological answer to how they did it has held for about a century. It goes like this. Workers used dolerite pounders, hard, dark stones slightly denser than granite, to hammer the rock into submission. Thousands of workers, millions of blows. Over months or years, the pounding wore down the granite millimeter by millimeter. Copper saws and drills, charged with abrasive sand, handled the finer cutting. Wooden wedges, soaked with water until they expanded in their slots, split the final connections and freed the block. That is the official explanation. It is taught in universities. It is printed on the informational signs at the quarry site itself, and there is genuine evidence for parts of it. Dolerite balls have been found throughout the quarry. Copper tool remnants have been recovered elsewhere in Egypt. An inscription on the Hatshepsut obelisk at Karnak even claims the stone was completed and erected in 7 months. An astonishingly fast timeline that implies enormous organized labor. But here is what the signs at the quarry do not explain, and what has been quietly noted by engineers, machinists, and materials scientists for over 100 years. The quarry walls don't look like they were pounded. They look like they were scooped. The first person to document this anomaly in precise technical language was a British archaeologist named Reginald Inglebach in 1922. He stood at the edge of the Aswan Trench, the narrow channel cut around the unfinished obelisk, and described what he saw with language that has never stopped being strange. He said the walls looked as if they had been attacked by a gigantic cheese scoop, not by hammers, not by picks. Smooth, curved scoops, regular spacing,
repeating at intervals of roughly 1 foot across the entire quarry wall, above and below the obelisk, and in tight vertical faces where no worker could have swung a pounder with any real force. A 2022 photogrammetric study, a precise 3D measurement of the quarry surface using modern laser scanning, confirmed Engelbach's century-old intuition with hard data. Researchers measured the rate of material removal using dolerite pounders under controlled conditions. The rate was 216 cubic centimeters per hour, with 85 hammer blows per minute. That sounds reasonable until you do the math for the full obelisk. At that rate, with that workforce, the time required runs into territory that doesn't fit the historical record. The researchers who published that study concluded, in their own words, that the results speak against the use of only dolerite pounders in this process. This is where the scoop marks matter, because a 2024 AI analysis of multispectral imaging of the quarry site measured the geometry of these marks with a precision not previously possible.
Size variation across scoop marks, less than 5%. Spacing consistency, within 3%. Curvature and angle of approach, uniform across different blocks, different faces, different sections of the quarry, separated by significant distances. Less than 5% variation across thousands of marks, across a site the size of several city blocks. For context, a skilled modern craftsman with a handheld tool would struggle to maintain that level of consistency across a single block, let alone across an entire quarry. And many of these marks appear on vertical surfaces and beneath overhanging rock in spaces too confined for a worker to deliver any meaningful swing force at all. The official explanation requires every one of those marks to have been made by hand, by workers in physically compromised positions over months or years, and yet the marks repeat with mechanical regularity. The data is clear. The implication remains deeply uncomfortable. For a moment, the team that published the photogrammetric study sat with a version of the same discomfort Engelbach had felt 100 years earlier, not because they believed in lost machines, but because the numbers didn't let them look away. If the scoop marks are a problem for the quarrying story, Petrie's core number 7 is a problem for everything else. To understand why the drill core matters, you need to understand what granite is. Granite scores between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, the same scale used to rank minerals from talc at 1 to diamond at 10. Copper scores between 2.5 and 3. Even hardened copper alloys rarely exceed 4. You cannot cut granite with copper, not efficiently. The metal wears away, the stone does not. The mainstream workaround has always been abrasives. The copper tube doesn't cut, it acts as a holder. The real cutting agent is sand, or corundum, or emery fed into the drill hole around the copper. The copper just keeps the abrasive in contact with the granite.
That explanation produces results. Experiments have shown it works. A team replicating ancient drilling methods in the 1990s did succeed in cutting granite with copper tubes and quartz sand. It was slow and laborious, but it worked. What it did not produce was a spiral groove. When you drill granite with a copper tube and abrasive, the marks left on the core are horizontal, concentric rings. The drill spins, the abrasive grinds, the marks are circular and equidistant. That is what the physics of the technique produces. Core number 7 has a spiral, a continuous, symmetrical helical groove running down the entire length of the core. The kind of groove a fixed cutting point makes when it advances steadily forward while rotating, the kind of mark a lathe produces, or a mechanically governed drill, not a bow drill operated by hand with loose abrasive. There is something else. The groove cuts deeper through the quartz crystals in the granite than through the softer feldspar crystals. This is the opposite of what loose abrasive produces. Loose abrasive wears down everything proportionally, with slight preference for the softer material. A hard fixed point, pressing and rotating at high speed, cuts harder material deeper because harder material provides more resistance to the cutting edge, and resistance drives the point in. The spiral groove on core number 7 was cut by a fixed point, rotating, under pressure, advancing into solid granite at a rate of 0.1 inches per revolution. Petrie called it astonishing. That was 1883. The word has held up. An acoustics engineer who examined the core decades later proposed that ultrasonic vibration could explain the characteristics. The theory, a vibrating copper tube, resonating at specific frequencies, could cut granite far more efficiently than rotation alone. The vibration fluidizes the abrasive, creates momentary high-pressure contact, and advances the cutting interface in a spiral pattern consistent with the tool geometry. Ultrasonic machining is a real technology. It is used today to cut ceramics, glass, and hard stones. The question is whether a Bronze Age civilization working with materials available in 2500 BC could have developed the principle accidentally or deliberately through experimental knowledge we haven't recovered. No one has been able to rule it out. If you're finding this compelling, a like genuinely helps this channel keep investigating these mysteries. It takes 2 seconds and it matters. At this point, in any video about ancient Egyptian technology, a certain kind of claim usually appears. Alien architects. Secret advanced civilizations, evidence of power tools and electrical systems buried in the hieroglyphs themselves. The Dendera light bulb, a carving in a temple crypt that some people insist depicts an ancient incandescent bulb, complete with internal filament. These videos have accumulated hundreds of millions of views. One YouTube channel built its entire identity on the premise that the pyramids were power plants, and the granite was chosen specifically for its quartz content. Quartz being piezoelectric, meaning it generates electrical charge under pressure. Fact-checkers have addressed most of these claims thoroughly. The Dendera carving is almost certainly a lotus flower with a serpent emerging from it. Standard Egyptian religious iconography. The piezoelectric pyramid theory requires ignoring the structure of granite itself, in which quartz crystals are randomly oriented and would cancel each other out rather than producing a coherent current. But here is what the fact-checkers often miss. The reason those videos spread is not because people are credulous. It's because the genuine anomalies, the real ones, documented by credentialed researchers in peer-reviewed contexts, are legitimately strange. Ordinary people encounter the scoop marks at Aswan. They look at core number 7. They read Petrie's actual words.
And they recognize that the standard explanation doesn't close the gap. The viral claims overreach wildly, but they are a distorted echo of a real signal. A materials scientist who spent time studying ancient Egyptian drill holes put it this way in a publication from the University of Pennsylvania's Museum Journal. Modern diamond drill cores are clumsy and smudged work compared to the Egyptian cores. That is not a fringe theorist. That is a peer-reviewed materials analysis, and that assessment has been sitting in the academic record since the 1980s, almost entirely ignored by the mainstream narrative that gets taught in schools. The alien theory is wrong. The nothing to see here dismissal is also wrong. Somewhere between those two positions, there is a real answer that hasn't been found yet. In 2015, a small and almost entirely unreported study came out of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Researchers had been examining a limestone fragment from the Amarna site in Egypt, excavated in 1891, sitting in a museum drawer for over a century. It was about the size of a paperback book, shapeless, no aesthetic appeal. Most people walked past it without a second glance. Under electron microscopy, the researchers found mineral residue embedded in the fragment's drill holes. They ran spectrographic analysis on the residue. It wasn't sand. It wasn't quartz, it was corundum, a mineral with a hardness of 9 on the Mohs scale, 1 step below diamond, harder than any tool the ancient Egyptians were supposed to have had access to. Corundum occurs naturally as emery, a granular rock used as an abrasive since antiquity. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, described emery being sourced from the island of Naxos in Greece. There is also a major natural emery deposit in Turkey, which may have been known in the ancient world. The Metropolitan Museum's finding doesn't prove that all Egyptian granite was cut with corundum. The sample is single.
The context is limited. Every legitimate researcher who has commented on it has flagged those caveats. But corundum, at hardness 9, changes everything about what is mechanically possible. With a copper tube, a fixed corundum abrasive pressed into the cutting surface, and appropriate lubrication, the kind of feed rate Petrie measured on core number 7 becomes achievable. Not impossible, not requiring ultrasonic vibration or alien technology, just a sophisticated knowledge of materials that we didn't give them credit for. And here is the thing that keeps researchers quietly occupied. Corundum doesn't preserve well in most archaeological contexts. It would have been used up, worn away, scattered. The chance of finding direct evidence of its use at any given site is low, regardless of how widely it was employed. Its absence from the record is not evidence it wasn't used. It is evidence that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There are no ancient corundum deposits that have been confirmed to exist within ancient Egypt's direct trade network, but there are unresolved questions about what that network actually looked like at its peak. Trade routes that reached Punt, Nubia, the Levant, the Aegean, a civilization with 3,000 years of continuous organized commerce across the ancient Near East. The idea that emery from Naxos never reached an Aswan workshop feels, when you look at the geography carefully, increasingly hard to defend. There is a temptation, when you spend enough time with these anomalies, to leap to the most dramatic conclusion available. And the most dramatic conclusion available is always that someone else built it. an advanced civilization, a forgotten people, intervention from somewhere we don't want to name. That conclusion is almost certainly wrong. It also isn't necessary. The more unsettling possibility, unsettling because it requires no mystery to resolve it, is that the ancient Egyptians were simply better at material science than we have been willing to accept. Not magically better, not impossibly better, just better in specific, practical, workshop-developed ways that left almost no durable evidence behind. Consider what we know, with certainty, that they achieved in other domains. They knew the circumference of the Earth. Eratosthenes calculated it from an obelisk shadow at Aswan and a measurement at Alexandria, with error under 2% in 236 BC. They developed medical procedures documented in papyri that include treatments still recognizable to modern physicians. They understood geometry, metallurgy, and logistics at a scale that supplied labor and materials across hundreds of miles for centuries without interruption. Of course, there are simpler explanations for some of the anomalies. The spiral groove on core number 7 may reflect a specific manual technique, a skilled craftsman giving the drill a final twisting torque that organized the abrasive marks into a pseudo-helical pattern. Some researchers argue exactly this, and their experiments have produced results that look partially similar, but partially similar is not the same as identical. And the data from the Aswan AI analysis doesn't yield to that explanation gracefully. Less than 5% variation over a site that large isn't a craftsman technique. It's either a tool or a system. Some materials researchers have proposed a possibility that requires no lost technology, but does require one conceptual shift. Ancient Egyptians may have developed a method for temporarily reducing granite's effective hardness through controlled thermal cycling, heating and rapid cooling, applied not as a crude cracking technique, but as a precise surface treatment that microfractured the outer crystal layer, making it far more susceptible to abrasive removal. Controller thermal cycling of granite is real. Modern quarrying uses it. The temperatures required are achievable with charcoal fires, and the tools needed, clay pots, controlled water application, charcoal, are all documented in ancient Egyptian inventories. If the surface was treated this way before drilling or cutting, the feed rates Petrie measured become less miraculous. Not simple, but achievable. Not alien, but brilliant. And if that technique was developed, practiced, refined, and then lost with the administrative collapse that ended the New Kingdom, if it lived in the hands of workshop artisans who never wrote it down because tradespeople didn't write things down, because writing was for priests and administrators, then we would have no record of it, none at all. We would have exactly what we have: beautiful surfaces, impossible feed rates, grooves that shouldn't exist, and no explanation. The unfinished obelisk still lies where it was abandoned, roughly around 1458 BC, over 3,500 years. It never moved. The workers never came back. Whatever crack appeared in the granite that day, visible to an experienced quarryman in some specific play of light that told him the stone was compromised, the whole project wasted. That crack ended what would have been the largest obelisk in the ancient world. And in stopping, in failure, it preserved something that completion would have erased. Every tool mark, every scoop-shaped groove, every anomaly that has occupied researchers from Engelbach to Petrie, to every materials scientist and AI analysis team that has stood in that quarry and looked at the walls and felt the same quiet unease. There is a particular quality to the pink granite at Aswan in the late afternoon. The light catches the mica flecks, and the stone seems almost warm, almost alive. The walls of the trench are narrow enough that you can touch both sides with your arms extended. The bottom is rough, with the detritus of 3 millennia of wind-blown sand, and the scoop marks, hundreds of them, smooth and curved and evenly spaced, looking less like hammer blows and more like someone drew a spoon across wet clay, are at eye level when you stand inside the trench. This is the thing that matters most. The Egyptians who made those marks were not mythological. They were people with apprenticed skills, with workshops, with professional knowledge passed from generation to generation. Workers who showed up in the crushing summer heat to a quarry that smelled of hot stone and dust, who solved problems that needed solving with the materials they had, who refined their methods over 3,000 years of continuous practice. The gap in our knowledge is not evidence of their mystery. It is evidence of ours. We have spent the modern era pattern-matching ancient achievement to modern industrial categories and concluding that what doesn't fit must be impossible. The anomalies in the granite say something different. They say, You have not yet understood what we knew. Petrie's core number 7 is sitting in a museum drawer in London right now. The spiral groove is still there. The feed rate is still 0.1 inches per revolution. And no explanation that has been advanced in the 144 years since Petrie published his finding has fully accounted for it. The Aswan quarry is still there. The scoop marks are still there. 3,500 years of Egyptian sun and wind, and those marks are still less than 5% variable across a site spanning hundreds of meters. The obelisk didn't move. The mystery didn't move. And the question that every engineer, every materials scientist, every AI analysis team keeps returning to is the same one Petrie asked in 1883. Not, were they aliens? Not, was it magic? Just, how exactly did they do this? Here is where AI analysis does something conventional archaeology cannot easily do. It measures without assumption.
It doesn't arrive at a quarry wall with a theory it needs to confirm. It measures curvature. It measures spacing. It measures consistency, and it returns a number. Less than 5% variation. That number doesn't care about the conventional narrative. It doesn't care about the alternative narrative. It is just a number sitting in the record, waiting for an explanation that fits it. The Grok analysis of the Aswan quarry site did not claim to have found proof of machines. It did not claim lost technology. It measured the marks and returned the data. And the data is what it is. What we do with that data depends on which way we decide to lean. So here's the question the evidence leaves open. And it is a binary one, because the evidence doesn't support a middle position. Either the ancient Egyptians developed material processing techniques, thermal cycling, fixed corundum abrasive, controlled vibrational drilling, sophisticated enough to produce mechanically consistent results at industrial scale, and those techniques were lost with the administrative collapse of the New Kingdom, leaving no written record because the people who knew them never wrote anything down. Or the marks we are looking at were made by something we haven't found yet. There is no third option that accounts for the data. Which one sits right with you? A civilization so skilled it outpaced our assumptions, or a gap in the archaeological record large enough to hide the most important technology in the ancient world? If this changed how you see ancient Egypt, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The next video goes somewhere even the Petrie researchers didn't expect.